Hello, everybody. How how is everybody doing? Welcome back to our first Facebook Live of May. I had wanted to go live while I was on holidays and had lots of technical issues. So I couldn't get into my email. I had problems with getting into Jane. I couldn't seem to get Facebook to do live. I could upload videos, but that was it. So it was pretty much like being told to just stay present and not to work, which was an interesting one because this was kind of something I'd been really, really excited to do. So I'm just going to post there. Let's see if I can get comments to work this time for my first time back, and we'll see how it all goes for me. If you are out there and watching live, throw me a hello. And even if you're watching the recording afterwards, throw me a hello so I know who's seen this and what's resonating for you and what do you want us to talk about. All those good things. So my first comment does not seem to want to post. See, this is the way it's all going to go. Let's try this. That one went. So now we'll see if it's going to let me see the rest. And if I go, whoops. Oh, we'll see. We'll see what it does for me. It's never ending, right? All right. So, yeah, I've missed you guys. I really thought I was going to get to interact and be part of our community while away, in my typical way, which is to do Facebook Lives or to chat on here. But that's the way of it. And it's kind of funny that it's perfect timing for what I wanted to talk about today, which is talking about what is it to be in alignment. And so that's the discussion I want to have today. I apologize in advance. I seem to be sitting beside somebody that got on the plane that was extraordinarily sick. And I was very much like, nope, I'm not going to get this. I have a good health. And after 27 hours of traveling and jet lag, it looks like I got it. So excuse me if I cough or if I sneeze. That's what's going on right now. So I'm going to hope for the best. So yeah, I wanted to talk to us about what is it to live in alignment, because we use those terms a lot and then it's like, well, what does that mean? What does that feel like in my body? And how do I know when I'm not in alignment? So that's the stuff I want us to really talk about today, because that was really the presence of my entire trip. So I like to set my intentions. I'd set my intention for 2025 to be, the word was alignment, and that's what I want to live in. And then I had been reading a couple times. I read the book, The Way of Integrity. And in that, she talks about how the eighth circle of hell in Dante's work, The Divine Comedy, that the eighth circle of hell is lying. And it's worse than murder and rape. And I was like fascinated by this whole concept. And why is that? And so one of the things that she talks about is because when we lie, especially to ourselves, and that's where the most dangerous place is when we're lying to ourselves more than this is about with other people. It creates a place within ourselves that we can hide. And so in that hiding place is where we can justify things that would maybe bring us out of alignment with our values. And I talk a lot about values because it's how we really get to know who am I. It helps us reconnect with our soul or our spirit and have deeper conversations with our loved ones. It helps us have and cultivate deeper intimacy with ourselves and with the world around us. And so going on this trip was an interesting one because I always struggle when I'm on holidays to keep my rituals. So when I'm at home, I have all these rituals with meditation, with reading spiritual work and journaling on them, and then working out and doing all these things. So I have like these very specific rituals that are great at home. But when I travel, it's inevitable that everything kind of goes sideways. And so I was like, how am I going to set myself up for success this time? Because as much as it was a holiday, it was a really busy holiday. So if you didn't know, I went to Spain. And so we landed in Barcelona, and we were in Barcelona for 2 days. And then we got on a cruise ship for a week. And then we were back into Barcelona. Then we rented a car and we went down in Spain, a little south, and we went to Tossa del Mar and a couple of other little seaside villages. And I was with people. And so you're not only doing a lot of things and going and doing excursions and that, but there's other people involved. And so it's everybody's vacation. So how am I going to pull this off? So this time, instead of taking my spiritual reading with me, which right now I'm working through the Bhagavad Gita again, I decided instead I would bring my Audible, and I would do The Power of Now. And so I've been doing a lot of listening to Eckhart Tolle's work, and it just feels like it's the right frequency right now with what I am cultivating in my life. And so in there, he kept talking about, the power of now, and to just simply come into the moment over and over again by reconnecting with our breath. And so I made that part of my trip. Now, this is very hard because when you have things that you always do, then it can feel kind of, it's asking me to close some things. So let's just make sure that we keep the stable connection. And I close all these other things down that I have open on my computer. Make sure that we are good. Hopefully that'll do it. There we go, dismiss. There we are. All right. And so instead, it was like, here I wanted to be into the Facebook group and be talking to people and showing my trip. And I could do it into my stories, but I really just needed to stay present. And that's not really very hard for me. Actually, it's hard for me a lot of times to take pictures or remember to videotape things because I have this tendency of stepping away from technology. And so even like when I started the podcast, I was really particular. I waited months to make sure that this was something I could do, that I could commit to it, and that I wasn't going to let people down, because now I'm saying this is here and this resource is there for you, and let myself down. And so I needed to make sure I could do all these things and stay in alignment with myself, to stay true and have integrity. And so that's what I wanted us to talk about today is having this integrity. And it was really cool because for the parts where I was like, bummed out that I wasn't in our group more and doing the Facebook Lives and all these things I thought I'd be able to maintain, I realized that it was really important for me to stay present while I was there, to be present with the people I was with, to be present with myself, to be able to stand, in the Basilica Familia in the middle of Barcelona, which to me is probably the most beautiful cathedral in the world. And I say that having gone to the Vatican last year, and I go to wherever we are in the world, I always go to big cathedrals and even little churches. And I like to understand the history that's behind it. And Familia was, I think, the reason why it got me is the absolute beauty of it was that the architect, which is Gaudi, which is why, that statement, it's very gaudy. And so, there's this kind of whimsical storybook, fairy tale kind of vibe to this incredible cathedral that's still being built. And it was stunning. And one of the reasons I found it so stunning is that every single thing in the cathedral connected to nature. Even the cathedral itself is, I think it was half a meter shorter than the smallest or the largest mountain range in the area, because he felt it was disrespectful to build something higher than God, than what God had created. And so he wouldn't build as high as the mountain range that was around Barcelona. And there's reverence to, whether you want to call it God or universe or source, this reverence for life and for the light that's in everything. And so every single stained glass piece was, and all these intricate details would be like, they would be connected to like a seed or a certain type of flower or how nature naturally grows. And so he mimicked nature in the entire cathedral. And to me, I thought it was so stunning because it's the first time that I have ever seen anywhere in the world where the cathedral was in reverence to nature, where it was actually like seriously mimicking it rather than, big gold pieces that were in there and things that kind of more related to man. It was really about nature, and I just thought it was stunning. And so I made it my whole piece about this trip was, how am I going to do this trip and be completely in integrity with myself? I'm going to continue with my commitment that there'll be no lying to anybody. And that means even holding my voice when I know that that's wrong. And so it was an interesting, and I'm on this journey on my own. My friends have their own journeys on, we're not, we often don't talk about even a lot of the stuff that I talk about here. And so it was an interesting piece, like, how am I going to really hold and be present? And so that's what I want us to talk about, was like that experience of staying completely in alignment, even when traveling with other people, while things were going off where it wasn't what I'd planned, and how does that all feel and how does it all work? And then when we don't stay in alignment, when something goes off, how do we get soft with ourselves? Because I think a lot of times when things go sideways, then it becomes the criticism and the judgment and the shame and the guilt. And instead of going into all of that stuff, which has no help, it has no value. So rather than doing that, what does it look like to just be gentler, to get a little bit softer and be like, how'd that happen? And so going through those pieces. So I want to talk about the illusion of all of this today. So what it actually means to be in alignment is not really about what it looks like. And it's not about what Instagram says. It's not about what everybody else in social media is saying. It's really about a feeling within ourselves. And so it's a sense that we get in our bones. And there is some times that it can be confusing, because one of the things, like, I made my notes on it, and one of the things is alignment doesn't always feel peaceful. And I think that's a thing that gets confused, is we think, like, when we're looking at all the the little Instagram posts and these pictures and posters, it's like, oh, being at peace and being centered and being quiet, and the kind of that Buddhist vibe to it. But sometimes being in alignment doesn't feel like that at all. Not when we're dealing with our family, not when we're dealing with our inner circle or work or friends or loved ones. So, sometimes alignment doesn't feel peaceful. What it does feel is honest. It feels like we're being super truthful, even if that hurts or makes us kind of tense a bit, because sometimes when we're in alignment with ourselves, there's going to be those moments where we feel anxious that we're going to be rejected, that, somebody's not going to like what we have to say, that it's going to start a hard conversation. So it's okay to feel when we're in alignment. Sometimes it is going to feel there's still some anxiousness there. There's still a feeling of tension. It's not contraction so much, like we're not pulling back, but there's tension, like a minute of holding our breath, like, how's this going to go? And we just hold, just waiting, because we just don't know. It's a complete unknown sometimes that we're walking into. And so understanding that sometimes, it means honesty does mean it's going to be a bit messy. It means we are going to have a bit of harder conversations. It's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable. And it also means that we're not abandoning ourselves. And so trying to find these ways, and what will happen sometimes, it did for me, is in the beginning of this process years ago, when I was being honest, or sometimes, like, even if, like, I'm feeling really tense, which means I don't trust the situation around me, that I can be a little more aggressive with what I'm saying, with my truth. So it can come across as aggressive, which sometimes is just because I needed to really just blurt it out so I could get it out, versus hedging and trying to come around it. And I always say, clear is kind, Brene Brown, clear is kind and unclear is unkind. And so I'm very rarely passive aggressive, because I find passive aggressive is unclear and it's unkind. But sometimes when I'm in a blurt, or if I'm feeling anxious or worried about an outcome, or there's some fear there, then it might come out as more of an aggressive statement, people might think, but it's because of that I'm pushing or blurting something out. And I definitely found that to be the case more years ago, when I first started this practice of needing to learn how to blurt my truth. And actually at that point, so when I was about 32 years old, so we're like 17 years ago, I just started hanging out with Mike, and I was just kind of in a new stage of my life. And all of a sudden I got really, really sick. It wasn't over sudden. Actually, it had been going on for a long time. It kind of hit its crux. And so the doctors were doing all these tests. They thought I had like ulcers. They thought something was going on in my insides, and they couldn't figure it out. And if I ate anything, even a cracker, I would have these extraordinary contractions of extreme pain in my body. And so finally they did a bunch of tests, and they're like, your body's eating itself. It's stress. Your body's eating itself. It's not like an ulcer. This is like they were like, this is it's insane, really. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And so it was my first foray into two things. So one, my doctor said, you need to start blurting. This is happening because you're swallowing your thoughts or what you have to say out of fear of kind of blowback. And so I started at work having to blurt. So if I disagreed with something, I would blurt like, no. And it was like really hard. Like I had to get it past an obstacle that would be in my throat. And then it would progress from there. So then I could start, getting a little bit gentler, a little bit softer, having more conversations. That's really how I became who I am now. Because when I was younger, 18 years old, I married my first husband, and he's a sociopath. There's extraordinary amounts of physical, emotional, mental, and sexual abuse. And so I was very passive. I was very, I was terrified. I was terrified that I was going to die. And so I didn't learn how to be, have boundaries and use my voice for many, many years later. I was 20 when I escaped and went into hiding. And then it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I started to even figure out my voice and figure like, who am I? Who is this person? If we don't attach a partner or, our children. And so that became the beginning of all of this work. So the first part of that was learning how to blurt. And then the other part of it was my body was in such a state of contraction that it was actually like it was in giving labor. So my body was literally in a state of contraction, my pelvic floor. And so it's not unusual. That can happen with people who have, if you've broken your tailbone, if you've given vaginal birth, if you have had sexual trauma, all of which I had actually done. So I was like, oh, I had no idea. And then on top of that, your pelvic floor is first chakra. It's root chakra. It's safety and survival. And I had never, ever in my life felt safe and felt like this was a place that I could survive in. As a matter of fact, I'd believed up until I was 40 years old that I would die before I was 40 years old. So I had no belief that this was a safe world to live in. And so I had to learn. I had to learn how to blurt. I had to learn how to talk and use my voice. And then as I got through that, it was more passive aggressive. And then that's when people would talk to me about like, you've got a heart wall and you need to do some heart work. And so that kind of led me down the next road of healing. And so understanding that when our heart is open, then the voice gets softer. It gets softer, but it also gets more truthful. And so often when the voice is tight, it's because our heart is closed and it doesn't feel like it can support it. And so we want to go down first to come back up. And so the more that we kind of get out of our head and get into our heart, the easier the voice gets to speak. And so that was the beginning of all of this, of, practical spiritualism, even though I had no idea that that was going to be born down the road. It was the beginning of Sovereignty Rising, the beginning of all of it, and really the rebirth of myself. It was, I've been reborn over and over again in this lifetime, and it was a big one in that moment to start to find my power, and to find my power within my voice, within my smile, within what I was seeing and witnessing and sharing. And so this is what I want for all of us. All of us here in the circle, all of us here in this world, is the more and more that we get to know ourselves and get into alignment with ourselves, the world naturally heals around us. And so this is, my dream for this world, for this life, is to be a part of that versus a part of spreading fear and anger and separation. And so this is what I want for all of us. And so when we're going through this illusion of alignment, often we think alignment means we feel calm, and it doesn't often. Often when we're in alignment, when we're in true integrity with ourselves, it can feel a little unnerving. It can feel like, what are they going to say? Am I going to lose my friend? if they don't agree with what I have to say. Does it mean that we learn how to have hard conversations? It does. What's really cool is when we do it in a respectful way, we deepen those relationships. Even if we don't end up even agreeing with things, we still can have a much better, deeper relationship with people when we do this work. And so, people often confuse looking aligned with being in integrity. And so what I mean by that is we look like we're doing all the right things, but it maybe is not an integrity, which would mean being in alignment with our values. And so we want to really look at who am I? And that's why I always go back to values first. I always head back there. And the reason is once we understand what our values are, then we can understand what it is that we need to check against. And so for myself, understanding that intuition, respect, loyalty, it comes off and it comes back on all the time. Sovereignty, which is integrity for me, curiosity. Curiosity is often the one that is my warning. Are you being curious right now? Are you being curious about this person? Are you being curious about the situation? Are you being curious in this moment? And often that's the one that is my warning bell that I need to get curious, because it tells me when I'm being judgmental, when I think I know an answer versus getting curious and asking some questions that allow us to deepen relationship. And so curiosity often is my warning light that comes on for me, that I need to get more curious, get more compassionate. It's funny because as soon as I have curiosity, then I become more compassionate and I become more caring. And we start looking at all the other aspects of our soul and our spirit, and those things start coming into alignment. And so that really comes into place. So noting there's a difference between a look versus a feeling and something that's very deep and very personal. And each of us is going to be different, because I'm always fascinated that I have a circle of 5 friends. They were my 5 bridesmaids, my maid of honor, my 4 bridesmaids for my wedding. And what's interesting is all of them have the value of family, which I find fascinating because it's not one of my values. And so I am definitely more of a lone wolf. I have to, really put effort in to connect. And part of that's just my own story. But it's an interesting one to me to watch. And it's the thing that I probably don't understand the most about them, because it's often where their boundaries are not really good. And then it's also, though, I'm in awe and wonder of this most beautiful relationships and life that they have within that family circle. So it's fascinating to me that what often happens is we don't actually have the same values as those that are close around us. We'll have some that are similar because they'll need to be. But, I have some of my friends that respect is very much one of their main values. And so that really aligns and we can talk on that level very easily. Whereas for me in intuition, they maybe wouldn't use that word and they might use some different words instead. And so, for me, spirituality but I link spirituality and spiritual growth, all those things I hold underneath intuition, because I think of prayer or meditation is a way that, actually not meditation, but prayer or contemplation or journaling, that sort of thing is all ways that we get to talk to God, spirit, universe, source, whatever. And that quietness, meditation, contemplation, intuition is when source talks to us. And so for me, intuition is very much about my spiritual life. And so figuring out those things for ourselves becomes really important. And as we get to know ourselves and time goes on, don't be surprised if your values change. And what I mean by that is that they don't really change. Well, they might actually, because if you're really, when you started doing this work, if you're really in your ego, then you might think competition or work, something like that will be one of your values. And you might find that falls away as you move more into your interior purpose as opposed to your exterior purposes. And so they could change completely. Or like mine, they can evolve, where I thought my value was freedom, and then it has evolved to sovereignty. And so understanding how that kind of works for ourselves, and that can shift and change. And noting that real alignment, when we think of it from on the physical plane, is in our nervous system. And so being able to take the deeper breaths, being able to feel this settling that happens in our body. And that's where the calm comes later. Because once we center ourselves and we ground down, and that's a practice I use a lot, is I'll breathe deep into my pelvis and then I'll kind of send energy down through the soles of my feet. And then I can ground down, and then I can dispense some of that anxiousness, that unknown that comes in. And that's where the peace can lay into. And so that can be a way that we experience that. So what it feels like. So what it looks like and what it feels like. So saying yes when we're out of guilt. So misalignment is when we say yes and it's more out of keeping the peace, or out of guilt. And so these were places that I noticed for myself. Like I had to really think hard. Like, can you do a year of telling the truth? Which means you can't say yes when you don't want to. You can't do things just to keep the peace. You have to be willing to shake things up a little bit. You have to say, like, this is my truth, and it's okay that yours is different than mine, but I'm going to hold mine anyways. And so that is one place. Feeling resentment after choices that looked good on paper. So often when we're in our head, when we feel resentment, that is a warning sign. Resentment is an emotion that we feel when we're out of alignment with ourselves, which is really interesting. Resentment isn't actually, we maybe feel resentment by what somebody else does or how we're treated, but mostly what it's actually about, especially like, so for myself, I have that value of respect. So if somebody's very disrespectful to me, it used to be where I would resent how I was being treated. What was interesting is the more that I got in alignment with myself and had boundaries around that, like, no, I'm not going to tolerate that behavior. I actually didn't resent people's behavior. That's on them. It has nothing to do with me. And so that goes back to the book, The Four Agreements. You know, it's nothing to do with you. Other people's behavior is their business. It's not yours. And so learning how to understand that how somebody else is acting isn't about me. And so the more in alignment with myself I become, the less resentment that I feel. And I can always tell when my ego's in play because resentment comes up. When I'm in alignment with my soul, with my spirit, I don't have that experience. And so resentment is often an alert, an alarm for us that we're either stuck in our ego or we are out of alignment with ourselves. Well, being stuck in our ego is being out of alignment with ourselves. And that's really when we look at what is self-realization or spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening or self-realization is the disentanglement between our soul and our ego. So our ego is created when we identify with form. So physical form, this is my body. My name is Dawn. I am a coach. You know, all those things, those are all ego-driven pieces because I'm identifying. I'm a mom, I'm a wife. You know, I'm a white, 49, almost 50-year-old female. Those are all ego identification. And so as we have self-realization or awakening, what we're doing is we're disentangling more and more from that. It's not that we're no longer our human experience. It's just that there's some space that gets made, and so that we can witness from a more detached place. And by detached, I don't mean cold and disinterested. I mean that it's actually we stay more open because we're not caught in, you know, the rigidity of our ego. There's not this fear and this defense that comes from ego and this fear of separation. And so as we have self-realization becomes the disentanglement between those two experiences, our soul and our ego, or our self, small self, big self. So that's kind of where that comes into play. The other thing for a nervous system or for a warning is I should be happy, but I feel dead inside. And so this was me for a long time, and nobody would have ever guessed. And I was like, my life, I wouldn't say I felt dead inside. That's like an extreme, like, and there are people that have that. I would say that I felt like discontent. So my life looked really great on the outside. And you've probably heard me talk about that. Like from the outside, life looked amazing. I had, you know, a beautiful big home. I had, you know, a nice vehicle. I had a great job. My ego was very well fed with my work. I had my son who I loved and adored. I had a stepson who I loved and adored. I had a great husband. I had my French bulldog. Like life looked good. I was traveling. And every day my question was, is this it? Is it? And I was really just not happy. And I didn't know how to get back to myself from that place at that time. And it does not mean that we suddenly need to leave our families or leave our jobs or any of those things. I know lots of people that have come back into alignment without a complete career shift. It means that we slowly but surely start listening to ourselves and figure out what are my values, and we come back into play. And so when we're out of alignment, discontent, or it could be right down to full dissociation, feeling completely dead or cold inside, those absolutely can come up when we are out of alignment with ourselves. And they're not signs that we're broken, which is how I was like, what's wrong with me? But they're signs that we're just simply out of alignment. And our body, in its most brilliant essence, because our bodies are brilliant, they're trying to communicate with us. And so these are ways that our body communicates with us that there's a problem and we are out of alignment. And that is the most important thing for us to do, is come back into alignment with ourselves. Through that alignment, we get self-realization. And so it kind of goes through the steps. And then there's nervous system cues as well. So the contraction. So not just the tenseness of holding breath when we say no, and we know we're about to upset somebody, or we're going to disappoint somebody. So sometimes we can have tension there, but I mean full contraction. And so tight chest, shallow breathing, clenched jaw, those are the nervous system cues that something's wrong. Disconnection, so numbness, zoning out. So for all of my friends that have coping strategies, this is where we come into play. So when we are zoning out, or I'm just going to zone out and veg in front of the TV, or scrolling and watching reels, or all those things, and we're doing it in a way that we're not even aware of what we're doing anymore. We're completely unconscious. Those are coping mechanisms, and they are coming up because we're out of alignment and we don't know what to do. And so note where your coping mechanisms are, and rather than judging them as being bad, we can say, thank you for letting me know I'm out of alignment, that something's off. And if we can change the way we verbiage around that, then we won't have guilt and shame and disappointment in ourselves. Instead, it's like, oh, I'm totally coping right now. What's going on for me? And we can start getting curious. And curiosity is one of the aspects or characteristics of our soul. And so we want to get curious, and we want to be compassionate to ourselves, because it's another characteristic of our soul. And so being in that place where we can reconnect. And then the doubt spiral. So looping over decisions long after you've made them. This is a place that for me is still, it's like a warning bell right away. As soon as I'm looping, I'm like, you're in the past and you're supposed to be in the present. And it's like, it's so quick now to shut that down and just be like, nope, let's get back into this moment. Follow your breath, anchor into your feet, let that go. The past is done. And so what do you need to do in this moment? And so looping or doubt spiraling is a big one. I've talked about it quite a bit with my friends, but I don't think I've ever talked about it on here. When I go away on holidays, or sometimes on weekends, I'll have drinks. When I go on holidays, I absolutely, I have drinks and I don't worry about a thing. And I refer to it as spiritual napping. And when it's during the week, or when I'm at work, I'm doing anything like that, then I don't. And one of the reasons that I have pulled further and further away from drinking is because I get social anxiety. And it's not social anxiety that makes me drink, which is what it used to be. So I used to have drinks because I felt anxious and it was a lubricant, and that made me feel a little bit more confident. And instead, what started happening was, when I have drinks, I get social anxiety. And so then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, did I say something stupid? Did I offend somebody? Did I say something wrong? And so all of a sudden I'd find myself feeling extremely anxious the next day. And so I started to really create more boundaries around that. And so I really noticed that doubt spiraling would come into play, especially if I've had something to drink the day before. And when I say that, I mean it could be one drink. So, I mean, yeah, so it's not like it's one or two. So I'm just super aware of it. I'm a person that tries to not be an extremist. So I Don't say I'm never going to drink. It's whether I do or whether I don't. I'm just aware of what the consequences are if I do it. And so notice that if there's same things that you're doing that are a coping mechanism, but that coping mechanism is actually now antagonizing something that's worse afterwards. And so that's when I went from, when I was in retail, I drank quite a bit. And so clients would even ask, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you do this all the time? And I'd be like, oh, I drink. And they would all laugh. And I was like, no, seriously, like half a bottle of wine. Like, I drink. And that was the first thing that I noticed after I stepped away from doing retail, is that was no longer a need. That if I was having drinks, it's because I was choosing, and it was like having fun, and that's why I'm doing it. But I stopped drinking just for drinking. And so where does that come up in your life? Notice it. And that is also because it's the warning signal. It's the disconnection. And so I joke and I call it spiritual napping when I'm on holidays, but note it and be there with it, and be very honest with yourself. Because remember that eighth circle of Dante's Divine Comedy was lying, especially to ourselves. And so a lot of this is about just getting honest, like what's true for me, and being really honest with ourselves. If we choose to drink and it's like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to drink, everybody else is having drinks and I'm going to join them, just be honest with yourself. And rather than belittling yourself or begrudging yourself, then just be honest with yourself. Like, yeah, I did that. And if there's a payment plan the next day, anxiety comes up, be like, maybe I should think twice about that. Maybe I need to have one drink and then fill my can up with water, or not, and just drink water. So figuring out what's our own truth and our own path is so important. And so one of the things I want to share with you guys is a drop-in practice. And so this is kind of how I work for myself all the time. And so wanting to do this really together today. So rubbing your hands together, creating a little warmth, a little heat. And when we're rubbing our hands together, we have two things happening. We're activating the left and right hemisphere of our brain. So that's part. The other part is that the heart meridians run down the insides of our arms through the center of our palms to the ring finger. Strongest on the left because your heart's on the left side. And that's why the wedding ring finger is the wedding ring's held there. So we've got two things. We're opening up our heart and we're activating the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And then I want you to place your right hand on your heart and your left hand on your belly. And as you feel that, I want you to gently press in. So feel the palpitation, the weight, the connection between your hand and your physical body. That right hand in your chest, the left hand on your abdomen. And I want you to inhale nice and gently, just slow. And then exhale slowly. And I want you to think of a time that you said yes, but you felt no. Or maybe you said no and you felt yes. And I just want you to think about it. Maybe close your eyes if that feels right for you. And just bring it to mind and bring as much detail there as you want, but just bringing it forward. And then I want you to ask, where does this live in my body? Where does this live in my body? And you might feel like your awareness just moves somewhere. Maybe it moves to your abdomen or to your hips. Maybe you feel a pinch or a point. Maybe you feel a little zing, some heat. So just noticing how you get that answer as well. How does your intuition speak to you? And as you're feeling that, I want you to think now of a true yes. And as you think of your true yes, a time where you've said yes and you felt yes, or something's coming up and you are just like, yes. And I want you to notice where you feel that in your body. Notice how it feels. Is it a softening and expanding? Is it a warming? Is it a lean forward versus a leaning back, or vice versa? Because people will feel different from this. And then bring in a current decision and ask, does this feel like expansion or contraction? Or maybe there's been something that you've been asking or something you're trying to decide and you've been outsourcing the answer or doubting yourself. And I just want you to bring that question forward to yourself now And notice where the answer lies in your body. Do you feel that softening? And as I always say to my clients, there is a very small difference between anxious and excitement. And so sometimes when we're feeling excited, there's a bit of anxiousness there because it's an unknown, but it's the language that changes it. So is this anxiety or anxiousness or contracting, or is this excitement? So noticing what that feels like in your body. And I just want you to sit with it and just let you breathe through it. And I want you to do this practice as often as you can, especially for the next little while. Can you just sit when you need to make a decision, go to the bathroom, go into a room away from everybody, hand on heart, hand on the belly, and ask the question, yes or no? And there's nothing wrong with taking a sacred pause. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I'm not sure if I've got something going on or if there's something that's there. So can I get back to you on this? There's nothing wrong with taking the amount of time that you need to make an answer. The big key is being honest once you've made the answer. So instead of, not wanting to call them back or share it, it's leaning into it and just being honest. Yeah, it's not going to work for me. Or yeah, this is going to work for me. And so where that needs to be. And I said to you earlier, yes versus a no and a no versus a yes, because often we say no to things that maybe really are a yes for us because of how, we don't want to upset somebody else in our life. And so notice if it's either or. Sometimes it's not that we say yes when we mean to say no. Sometimes we say no when what we really wanted to do was say yes. And so just notice where that sits for you and which one's more true. Because it'll often let us know what's going on in our life around us and where we need to start making some adjustments. And I want you to remember that you don't need to get it perfect. You don't need to always know, but you do deserve to stop betraying yourself. You get to move in alignment, even if that means being misunderstood. And that is really what we're here for in the Awakening Circle. Is I want to create a space and wanted to create a space that we get to have these conversations. So when we feel like we're being misunderstood in our other circles, our friends, our family, our work, this is a place that we can come and support each other, to be able to take the sacred pause, to be able to honor ourselves with gentleness and with respect. I'd love to hear from you guys about how this conversation landed, what came up for you, what is your next step? And please share it with a friend. Invite your friends that are on this path, that feel like this is a good fit. It feels like they're safe. Then invite them to be part of this, to be part of the Awakening Circle in our community here. This isn't just my community, it's our community. And so, this is what I want for all of us, is to create these sacred relationships, these sacred conversations that we get to feel safe, even if we don't always agree. So I'd love to hear from you on what came up for you today. And just in case you haven't heard, I have a free 5-day boot camp that is coming up, and it is called the Unlearning. And so we will be delving in. It's going to be for 5 days, 1 hour each day. It will be recorded, so if you can't make the live, then there will be a recording for it, and you will get that emailed to you. And so it's going to be 5 days. It is called the Unlearning, and it is pretty much the baseline of all my work. So there'll be tons of stuff there. There's a workbook so you can work through things. And again, it's just cultivating this work even deeper. And I will throw the link to sign up for that, because sign up is now open. We had a wait list before, but the signups are open, and I will throw that link in the comments for you as well. Until next time, I hope you all are having a fabulous and blessed day, and I look forward to being with you all again soon. Brightest of blessings.